All right. So my name is Mike Ellis. I am a solutions architect here at Anexanet, and today I'm going to be talking about microfrontends, specifically how they're implemented with Singlespa. As far as a rough agenda for today, we'll first talk about what microfrontends are. Then we'll talk about what is Singlespa, what are the benefits, how does everything work together. We're going to go over a recommended setup for microfrontends in a Singlespa world that'll allow you to really leverage all the advantages of microfrontends. We're going to be reviewing code throughout, and then questions and feedback at the end. Feel free to interrupt me though if something is just completely unclear. Before we get into the demo, or I'm sorry, the slides, what I'd like to do is just take a real quick sneak peek at this app and just introduce it. This is what we're going to be working with throughout this this presentation. It's very simple application. This is the landing page here. It's got an employees page. You can see that goes to an employees route. That shows, it's like an index page. It just lists all the employees. This is a dummy REST API call. So this is whatever that endpoint I hit is returning. Each employee has some high-level information, an ID, which is hyperlinked. You can see we're on the employees page right now. If I click this page, I'm going to go to a details page for that ID. You can see there's a picture of the person. Again, this is another individual call for an employee data, and then I can link back to the index page. So very simple application. So I just want to introduce that. All right, let's see. So what are microfrontends? So microfrontends are microservices in the browser. So microservices, collection of independent parts that make up a larger system. The idea behind microfrontends is to think about a web app as a composition of features, which can potentially be owned by independent teams, be of a different framework, etc. So each microfrontend, if you go with a certain setup approach, can have its own Git repository, its own build process, its own tooling, webpack config, package JSON, etc. So it's literally its own separate application. Now, if we look at this graphic right here, this is an example of what a application with microfrontends could be. You could have a header section, which is a application written in Angular. You can have maybe a left nav that's written in React, and then you can have some other area of your page that's written in Vue. Now, you don't necessarily have to have all these in a different framework, but this graphic here just kind of shows the versatility of microfrontends. And actually, so this application we looked at, kind of wanted to have it be a little more dramatic, but this is an application with microfrontends. So I was actually hiding, there's a little DOM element, which is included in each one of these sections that shows the name of the microfrontend, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and what framework it was used to write it. So this nav bar here, which has this, the app name, the employees link. This is the nav bar. This is written in React. And then when I click on this employees index page, this is a totally separate application in a different repo. It's the name of this microfrontend is called mfdemo/employees, and this was written in React. And the employees detailed page, this is actually a totally separate microfrontend written in Angular. So this should be pretty exciting. If you guys are half as excited about what you just saw as I am, you should be somewhat impressed already. Just to be clear, you wouldn't necessarily want to separate an employee's feature, and have different apps for the index page and a details page. This is just a demo, so I just wanted to kind of, there's a finite number of pages, so the details page I just made an Angular micro front end, where the index page is a React front end. But you can see, I mean, I think when we did the initial review, you know, I assume you just thought it was some simple SPA where you had a cohesive experience. The page didn't reload going from one section of the page to another. So, so that's that. Let's see. All right. So, okay. So what is Singlespa? So Singlespa is a framework for bringing together multiple JavaScript micro front ends in a front end application. So more technically, it's an NPM package that controls the mounting and unmounting of your micro front ends. You can think of Singlespa basically as like a top level router. When a certain route is active, it will download and execute the code for that particular route. There's lots of benefits of micro front ends. The first, which we just saw in our little demo app, is that you can have multiple frameworks on the same page. So this can mean that technical decisions are made by individual teams. So if you have a large product, a large company, and one team decides they want to write it in React, or another team, maybe they have more experienced developers in Angular, you can do that. And there's obvious benefits there for organizational scaling. Another benefit is that you can deploy your micro front ends independently. So that means smaller and faster builds, obviously, and then independent release schedules for each team. The most compelling benefit in my mind when I started looking into micro front ends is the ability to write code using a new framework without rewriting your existing application. So I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the strangler pattern, but ultimately it has to do with incremental migrations. So let's say you have a very an old Angular JS app, and there's a desire to rewrite that in Angular or React. Instead of having to wait, 9 months, a year, or whatever, to fully build the new application and swap it out, you can start implementing the new framework piecemeal and ultimately strangle out the old legacy framework. So for those who do a lot of front-end development, this is especially beneficial in the world of JavaScript, where the frameworks have a notoriously short lifespan. The last benefit that I'm calling out here is that you can lazy load code for an improved initial load time. So we can actually go back to our demo app here, and I'm going to refresh the landing page. And what we're going to do is we're going to real quick look at just the JavaScript the JavaScript network traffic. So you see a lot of dependencies here, and we can talk about some of those later. This MF demo root config, we're going to talk about that, but ultimately that's the root application in Singlespa. MF demo navbar, that's the JavaScript that is responsible for just the navbar. So since I've refreshed this page, the only micro front end on the page right now is the navbar, and I've only downloaded the code that supports that navbar micro front end. When I click on the employees index page, only then, since it's the first time that page is loading, only then does it actually go out and download the JavaScript for the MF demo employees micro front end. And then lastly, I click on the index page here, the details page for employees, and that doesn't have a pretty, or at least a nicely named JavaScript file there. But this is the JavaScript that is responsible for the details page. So we're lazy loading the JavaScript for each specific micro front end. All right. Oops. Okay. far as the different elements that make up Singlespa, there's really two main elements. First is the Singlespa config, which is, you'll see it usually referred to as a root config. That is the root HTML file that is shared by all the Singlespa applications. And it's also some JavaScript that registers applications with Singlespa. The other element of Singlespa are applications, which you can have n number of. Each one is an entirely separate SPA unto itself, which can respond to URL routing events. And it implements a few functions that interact with the DOM that we'll talk about in a little bit. So digging in a little bit more into the root config, you need to register your applications with Singlespa so it knows how and when to initiate, load, mount, and unmount them. So when you actually register an application, you need to include three things. You need to give it a name. You need to supply a function that will actually load the application's code. And you need to supply it with a function that determines when the application is active or inactive. Additionally, there's a start function. So the start API, you need to call that. That needs to be called by the root config in order for applications to actually be mounted. So before you call start, the applications will be loaded, but they won't be bootstrapped or mounted or unmounted. So let's actually look at the root config here. So this is the root config application here for the micro front end that the application that we've been looking at here. And this is where I register the different applications. So we can see there's a navbar application I'm registering, and employees, and an employee detail. So those are the three applications we looked at. You can see the first registration here. This is parameterized. So you pass a name, you pass this function, which will actually load the application code. This is just an import to a named dependency. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And lastly, there's a function here. And I'll zoom in so you guys can see better. There we go. Is that better? I assume so. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool. So in this case, I'll make it even bigger actually. There we go. Okay. So the third thing you need to supply, like we talked about, is a function that will determine whether the app is active or not. So you can see this calls just a separate function. These are called activity functions. And in this case, in navbar, we always want it to appear. So it just returns true. Now, there's another more expressive API that you can use to register applications where you pass an object that has named properties here. So I think this one's a little bit cleaner, the API, but nonetheless, you can use either one. And we're doing the same thing here. We're naming our micro front-end application. We're telling it how to load the data. And then in this case, I just inline the activity function. So whenever the route is /employees, it will load the employees micro front end. Same thing with the employees details. I'm actually using the activity function again here. This just has some regex. So when the route is /employees /number, it will render that route. So the reason you have to call start separately is if you may want to register applications immediately to start downloading code for the active ones, but not actually mount the applications until maybe you want to have an AJAX request. Maybe you're trying to find some information about the logged in user. So you could execute that and not actually mount the micro front ends until that is complete. Now, there's actually one more optional parameter you can pass, and you can see this is custom props. So that's where you can pass any piece of data in addition to these pieces here. So if you did want to pass, logged in information to each one of these applications, that will be passed via the custom props property, and that will get passed for every lifecycle event of that micro front end. Okay. Any questions before we move on? Okay, cool. So that was the root config. The other component, if you will, of Singlespa are applications. So each application is responsible for implementing the following API. It needs to implement a bootstrap function, which initializes the app. This is only called once, and it's called right before the registered application is mounted for the first time. And then you need to define a mount and unmount function. Mount will activate the application, unmount will deactivate the application, and those are both done based on the result of that activity function we looked at. So all of these functions here, these need to return a promise or be an async function. And once you've defined that, really Singlespa will do the rest. So the good news is that you might think that is, that's got to be challenging, in my Angular, or my React, or my Angular JS application to tell Singlespa, how to react, how to behave with my application. Now, the good news is that there are some helper libraries out there which essentially do that for you. So you can see we're now looking at the application code for the navbar micro front end. And you can see in here, I'll ignore this for now. You can see I'm importing the Singlespa React library, and I'm basically wrapping my root component in React with that function. You don't really need to know that much about React, but you're essentially wrapping your React application in this helper library. And as a result of that, you will get the bootstrap mount and unmount functions that you can export from this, this file here. And then, Singlespa then will recognize this as a micro front end that it can work with. So the one other thing I'll mention while we're in here is that really you just need to load the root component, but optionally you can define what is they're calling a DOM element getter. So what this will do, and we're going to go back and take a quick look at the root configs HTML file. If you recall, this is the this is kind of the second part of a Singlespa config or root config. The one is the area is where you register the applications. The other is the HTML. So in the body of this HTML, which we're going to look at right now, you can see I have some elements here which have IDs. So the one is mf navbar is the ID, and another one is mf content. So if you're going to have two micro front ends on the page at the same time, it's good to use this DOM element getter, which basically says, I want you to load this micro front end in this element in the body. If you can't find it, create it, but I want it to be injected into the page there. And what that will do is that will allow you to control where on the page the micro front ends will be injected, just so they're not injected in the order in which the dependency is resolved. So just a little best practice I thought I'd mention there. And these helper libraries, they are basically available in any front-end framework you could imagine writing an application in. There's this, we're looking in React right now, but there's one for Angular, Angular JS, anything really. Okay. So let's see. Oops, that's way too far in. All right. We've been focused on applications this entire time as far as types of micro frontends, but there's actually 3 different types. Again, the applications we've looked at, they are micro frontends that render components for a set of specific routes. Now, there's another type of micro frontend called a parcel. And a parcel is essentially a framework agnostic component. It's a chunk of functionality that's meant to be mounted manually by an application without having to worry about which framework we use to implement the parcel. So again, with parcels, they're imperative. You're manually mounting them from a application, whereas applications, they will be mounted and unmounted based on how you register them with Singlespa in your root config. So these are best suited, the parcels they're best suited for sharing UI between frameworks. So let's take an example. So let's say you have 2 micro front ends. One's in Angular, one's in React. Let's say the Angular app contains all the UI and logic to create a user, which is something that is now needed in the React app. Singlespa parcels will allow you to wrap your Angular component in such a way that you can make it work inside your React app, despite the fact that they're in different frameworks. So potentially very powerful. Now, parcels are not something that I have spent much time digging into. I've been really focused in my learning of micro front ends and Singlespa on applications, but definitely want to communicate that parcels are out there. The other type of micro front end is a utility module. So this is a micro front end that just basically exports shared JavaScript logic. So there's no rendering at all. It's no components, no rendering. So if you have some common logic for data fetching or authorization or whatever, you can have a micro front end that's a utility module that you can add to your Singlespa. And then the note down here, there's a one-to-one relationship between micro front ends and in-browser JavaScript modules. That's what we saw a little bit already, where we looked at the network traffic, and each micro front end had its own JavaScript that was being loaded. And we're actually going to talk about in-browser JavaScript modules more right now. So there's a number of different architectural approaches you can take for separating your micro front ends in your Singlespa application. So with micro front ends, you have the ability to do some really advantageous things with your application if you're able to set up your application in a certain way. So 3 of the most common ways I think people would set up their micro front end applications are listed here. So a mono repo, you could still have your applications be separate, but you could still put them all in the same, huge repository. In which case, they would be in the same repository. You wouldn't be able to do independent CI builds, and you would still just be doing one deployment. Another option is to separate your micro front ends into different repositories and then create NPM packages for each one that you can install into a root application. So that would allow you to have separate code repositories and do independent CI builds, but it wouldn't allow you to do separate deployments. You'd still be doing the one deployment of your main application if there was just a single change in one of your micro front ends. So the third architectural approach as far as separating your micro front ends, and the one that is recommended by Singlespa, is called module loading. And that allows you to have separate repos, independent CI builds, and separate deployments. So to talk about module loading, we need to talk about 2 features in JavaScript, which are not specific to micro front ends. They're not specific to Singlespa. They're features that are out there, but they allow you to leverage, you can leverage them and really take advantage of everything that's available with micro front ends. So let's talk about module loading a little bit. So to talk about module loading, you need to first talk about the different types of modules. And a module, when I say module, I mean anything, anytime you use the import or export keywords. So There's two different types of modules. You can have build time modules. Build time modules, your transpiler, which is either Babel or TypeScript, will actually compile away the import and transform it into a require statement. So I'm actually going to take a look at this. So this is an example of what Babel will do to this import here. So you're importing React, and when it actually compiles it, you no longer see the import statement. So within browser modules, the import line of code is retained, it remains, and that dependency is actually resolved at runtime in the browser. So you may be asking yourself, well, how do I configure which of my modules in my code base are going to be build time versus in browser? And it's actually quite easy. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at our root config application and take a quick peek at the Webpack config in there. So you can see there's this externals property in the Webpack config object. This is how you define which dependencies are going to be in browser modules. So in this case, anytime it sees, you try and import Singlespa, or you try and import something that is prefixed with mfdemo, which in my case is all of my micro front ends, it's not going to use the transpiler. It's not going to compile away those imports. It's going to retain them. And then when I run the application, it's going to then try and resolve them. So that's the first half of module loading. The other piece of it is import maps. So import maps allow you to control what URLs get fetched by JavaScript import statements. So they're defined in a script element in your HTML, and they allow you to specify a URL for a module by name. So you can actually have import maps be external and defined. You pass a URL to a JSON file that houses all your import maps, or you can define them inline. So you can see a number of the different advantages here. The one that is specific to the main reason this is the recommended setup for Singlespa is that each application can be independently developed and deployed. So one thing to note before we actually look at an example of an import map is that the import map spec is currently in the process of being accepted as a web standard. It doesn't work in any browser by default. Chrome is the only browser which could possibly allow it to work, and it's not enabled by default. But the good news is that there's a polyfill. There are polyfills out there that will allow you to get import map functionality in place. So the one that's recommended by the Singlespa core team is called System.js. So System.js is something you can use to get your import maps to work, which will allow you to do in-browser modules, which allow you to have the most advantageous setup for your micro front-end application. So let's take a quick look at the HTML file for the root config. So we were looking at the body earlier here. I'm going to scroll up so we can see some of the import maps. So you can see here is a inline import map block here. So you can see I've defined Singlespa. I've defined where to go to get the JavaScript to get my different micro front ends. So basically, whenever it needs to execute micro front end code in my application, whenever I have an import of the mfdemo navbar, for instance, it will go to the JavaScript file here. And you can see I'm actually running all of these locally right now. See, these are all 4 running. Now that's not really the ideal way you would do local development for a micro front-end application. What I think the best practice is that the Singlespa core team has advised is that you would only work on one micro front-end at a time. So you would have to ideally be pointing, just have one local, and the rest you'd be pointing to a dev environment or something that has an instance of these other applications running. So this, as you can see, this is an inline import map block, and you can see there's this imports property here of this JSON object. What you can also do, which I haven't included here, is you can have scoping for each one of these, and you can have it scoped by the URL of your application. So if you're in a certain URL, you can resolve, you can import dependencies from a different URL. So here I have commented out an external import map file, and I'm going to open that up. And this isn't to my application, this is to another one, so you can see how they have different names. But I'm hoping now things are clicking with everyone and they're understanding how you can build a micro front-end application and allow for independent deployments. Basically, you would have this external import map file hosted somewhere. You could kick off a build for an individual micro front end, and part of that build process, that CI pipeline, you could have, once it's completed, you can go into this import map file and update this with the latest JavaScript file for that micro front end. So that's how you can use import maps and in-browser modules in your micro front end application to do individual deployments, which is a very powerful thing. You can have individual groups responsible for different features in an application, and they can deploy them whenever they need to, and it doesn't affect any other team. Are there any questions about that before we move on? Okay. So let's see. We've looked at a bunch of applications. We showed that actually, what I'm gonna do actually real quick, just to make sure that everyone understood where these JavaScript files were coming from, is we can look at the details here. So you can see, I said I was running all 4 of these separately right now. You can see, this one is running locally, but it's on port 9000 for the root config. The nav bar is running on port 9001. The employees index page is on port 9002. And the employees detail page, which is the one micro front end that was built in Angular, that's on port 4200. So these are all essentially separate applications, totally separate applications, different code bases, but you can deploy them individually. Very powerful. So one more little exercise I wanted to go through. These micro front ends that I created for this demo, these were all created with a CLI tool that the Singlespa core team has provided. So let's actually go through the process of creating a new micro front end, a simple one. So what I'm going to do is going to open up the command line. Okay, so let me make this a little bit bigger. All right, that's better, I'm sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this npm package. I've already installed this create Singlespa. That's the CLI tool. I've already installed that globally in my computer. And I am going to run this code right here. So this command. What this is going to do is it's going to have the CLI tool create another micro front end called home what I'd like to do here is this landing page here is a little too bare for my liking. I'd like to add something here. So I'm going to name it home. I'm going to say that I want it to be a React application. This is where I could pass Angular, AngularJS, whatever. And by default, it's going to create it as an application. But if I wanted to create this using the CLI tool as a parcel, I would specify the module type. So they ask you a couple questions. Yes, I'll use all this. Organization name, I'll keep it the same, MF demo, and then we'll call it home. Okay, so this is, while this is installing, let's see if I can go to review suite. So maybe we can just talk about the Singlespa contributors. So I was very impressed with how responsive they were with questions. They have, if we look here, this is the Singlespa site where there's tons of documentation. So it's very thorough. But additionally, they have a Slack channel where the core team is on there, and like I said, they're very responsive. So if you end up wanting to check out Microfrontends or Singlespa, you can expect to get a good amount of support from them. Okay, so my CLI creation of a home page or a home microfrontend just completed. It's said to do npm install, but I feel like yeah, so I did that. So let's do this. Let's actually go. I just used Bootstrap for this application to get things going, but let me actually just copy the Jumbotron example code. We're going to plop that in the micro frontend code there. So what I'll do is I'll open up the home application, which the CLI tool just created. And you can see here's where it has the helper code right there to actually expose the 3 API functions or methods that I need for this to work with Singlespa. So right here is where I can define the my application code. So in this case, the default is to just display the name of the application, which is what I define in my register application in my root config. So let's do this. Let's just plop all this in here. We're going to replace class with class name because that's how it works in React. And then lastly, I need to fix this. So it should like that. So what I've done right now is I just added that Jumbotron code to my home micro front end, which I created with this Singlespa CLI tool. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start it again locally, and I'm going to put this one on port 9004. So what we should be able to do is, now that it's running, confirm that the JavaScript, great. Okay, so the JavaScript file is being exported there, or being hosted there. So now the only thing I really need to do is come back to my root config, and I'm going to add another micro front end called MF home or MF demo home. And then I just need to pass the URL to that JavaScript file. And so that's there. And the only other thing I really need to do now is to register the application. So I'll just copy that and do that right here. And this is called home, called it home. And then it's going to be imported from the home library, or I'm sorry, dependency. And then we'll say we only want it to appear when the path is just the landing page. So I got hot loading on, and you can see it's got my application right here. It's got my micro front end rendering. When I go to the employees route, it unmounts that that micro front end. I'll actually come back here and just prove that. Okay, yeah, see how it's lazy loading that that micro front end's JavaScript file from the locally hosted server on port 9004. So you saw how, I mean, it's obviously just a very simple hello world micro front end, but you can see how quickly it was that I was able, using the CLI tool, to just spin up a micro front end. Let me see if I had anything else. Oh, so if you want to take a look at those 3 at least micro front ends, not the homepage one, if you want to look at those plus the root config that we looked at during this demo, they're public repositories under my GitHub account, so it's MLS481. So feel free to go in there, poke around, let me know if you have any questions. That is, I think, all I had today for micro front ends. Are there any questions? Comments?
Yeah, hi, this is, I'm sorry, was I stepping over somebody else?
No, go ahead, Georgian.
All right, yeah, no, definitely, as you pointed out, this is for sure very interesting. But I was a little more curious, from the practical aspect point of view. So I don't imagine a situation when you will build something from the scratch and you would want to use this with mixed technologies, right? I mean, unless it's something probably so huge and you have several development teams and each one having its own speciality, and then you might want to divide it that way. But I'm not, I'm not sure what's the likelihood of that happening. On the other hand, I think that could come in probably more handy if you have you have an app that is probably in a stale mode, and you want to move forward with a different technology, either because you have more knowledge currently in your organization, or you want to move away, or you don't want to rewrite everything, but you still want to take certain advantages from an alternate technology, and then you might want to combine it like that. But once you are in that stage, I think it will still be a little hard to make the appropriate delineations, right, between how clean of a cut can you make between the the old features and the new features, and yeah. So yeah, I think that would be like a knee-jerk reaction on my end, but this, however, does not take away the interesting part of it. And also, I did find funny the name, the Singlespa, right? So
yeah,
single page application. So okay.
Yeah. You said a number of things. They actually, I think, in their FAQ, they call out, the name there. Let me see if I can find it. They somewhere call it out, and I read somewhere else why they called it Singlespa, because single page application. Going back to your comment about use cases where you could actually use this, like I was saying in one of the earlier slides, I think the incremental migrations is probably the most common use case. That said, at the client I'm at right now, there is talk of an effort to create a platform solution for across multiple products. So you could be on one page, and that would be implemented by a code that was already written for their one product, and then you could go to another page, and that would be that would be actually rendering code from another product, and it would be all this seamless user experience under the platform solution. So I do agree with you with some of the things you said, but I do think there are definitely more use cases than just the incremental migrations.
Yeah, for sure. As I said, those are just some first thoughts
Yep.
crossing my mind. That
Yep.
didn't mean to be comprehensive for sure.
Yep. Yep. Did anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, Hector here, and thank you for the call, for the lunch and learn. So, what are thinking, since you have more experience reading these and all these spotting, what are the implications of like managing teams that you think that will arise? So. Thinking that you'll have to create a product that will merge all these sub products that you just mentioned. Should we treat this merging of all these products like a new product and manage that as a separate project, or how will that be managed? I don't know if I was clear in my question.
Well, I am not sure how best to manage micro front end solutions which span, 2 or more teams. I would say, it would have to be, not have to be, but this is obviously targeted more for larger projects or larger organizations. That said, there's obviously use cases where maybe you have a small medium project and your team is just not co-located, or there's another reason for wanting to go the micro front end route where you have micro front ends managed by different independent teams. What I would say is that each of these applications is independently deployable. So really they could live by themselves. It's really the root config application that pulls it all together, which is your root app. That's your product, at least the one incantation of it. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but is it any more clear?
Yeah, you did. So that root product, let's say that will be treated as like a different project, right? Like merging all the products.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure how best to manage it. I mean, really, they're separate component features of a single product. That said, you could theoretically have multiple products that a single micro front end is part of. So it kind of depends on how your product or products are set up. Maybe that's the answer. If you have one product and you just have multiple front ends, multiple micro front ends that make it up, and you've decided to have multiple micro front ends just so you can have independent releases or different frameworks, but it's still just one product, you may want to manage that separately than, hey, I have this situation where I'm building a platform and I already have 2 product code bases, and now I just need to create a single platform solution. Maybe you still have your 2 separate teams there. So I'm not in project management, so I don't have a great answer for you there, but that's what I would think.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thanks everyone who attended. Hopefully this was informational. This is one of the things that, every few years you learn something in the technology industry that kind of blows your socks off. And for me, this was really impressive. Micro front ends with Singlespa. So I'm hoping people found it at least interesting. But thanks again for attending, and have a good day.
No, thanks for putting this together, Mike. Really, at least interesting, and hopefully useful in some circumstances. So.
Yeah, well, now you know what import maps are, at least, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
All right, take care, everyone.
Okay, thanks.